The Nightly Business Report.
Good evening. Tonight, Sri Lanka sees a surge in vehicle registrations as motorbike sales approach pre-crisis levels. 4 Sri Lankan companies granted approval enterprise status to boost spice re-exports and value-added production. Sri Lanka's ASPI index advances while S&P SL20 records a minor decline amid mixed market sentiment. And Wall Street closes lower as investor worries mount over tariff impacts on corporate earnings and global trade.
From Studio 24C, here's Anuradi Vikramasinghe.
A very good evening and thank you for joining us on the Nightly Business Report. Sri Lanka's vehicle registrations surged to 35,232 in July of this year, with motorcycles nearly reaching pre-crisis levels. Despite growth in cars and SUVs, three-wheeler registrations remain low due to limited credit access and rising prices.
Sri Lanka's vehicle registrations rose sharply to 35,232 in July 2025, up from 22,340 in June, with motorcycles doubling to nearly pre-crisis levels. Petrol-powered two-wheelers dominated the market, led by Bajaj and TVS, while electrical two-wheelers also saw strong sales. Motorcar and SUV registrations increased significantly, reaching levels similar to those before the crisis. However, three-wheeler registrations remain low, far below pre-crisis figures. The central bank recently eased loan-to-value ratios for three-wheelers, but access to credit for this segment remains limited compared to cars and SUVs. Rising three-wheeler prices, driven by rupee depreciation and high taxes, continue to challenge affordability for low-income buyers.
The Sri Lanka Export Development Board hosted a high-level meeting with the Singapore Food Agency to advance efforts in gaining approval for Sri Lankan poultry exports to Singapore. The discussions followed 2 SFA inspection visits to local farms and slaughterhouses, including audits of major facilities such as Bairaha Farms, Posala Farm and New Anthony's Farm. Sri Lanka highlighted its disease-free status and competitive poultry offerings, with exports reaching $5.4 million in 2024, a 37% year-on-year increase. EDB and the Department of Animal Production and Health have shortlisted companies for potential export and submitted applications to the SFA. The meeting focused on meeting Singapore's strict food safety regulations and emphasized the importance of bilateral cooperation. Officials from both sides expressed optimism that Sri Lanka will soon secure market access, strengthening agri-trade ties between the two nations. 4 local companies have been granted approved enterprise status for processing and re-exporting value-added spice products. This move supports Sri Lanka's growing spice export sector, which saw a 29.64% increase in earnings during the first half of this year.
The Cabinet of Ministers granted approved enterprise status to 4 Sri Lankan companies for processing and re-exporting spices in the form of oil extracts and residue. The approved companies are Stay Naturals Ltd, Virgin Naturals Ltd, Plant Lipids Lanka Ltd and HDDES Extracts Ltd. This designation follows the Import and Export Regulations No. 10 of 2021, allowing eligible enterprises to import, process and re-export selected spices. Companies must sign supplementary agreements with the Board of Investment to ensure compliance with quality and export commitments. The spice export sector has shown strong growth, with earnings rising 29.64% to $208.53 million in the first half of 2025. Key export performers include pepper, cinnamon and cloves, which saw significant year-on-year increases.
The Cabinet of Ministers has approved Sri Lanka's first virtual city project to be launched in Kandy by Sri Lanka Telecom. Funded through reallocated Clean Sri Lanka initiative resources, the project aims to boost digital tourism. In its first phase, SLT will create virtual models of 58 key tourist sites in and around Kandy. The second phase will focus on the Temple of the Tooth Relic and 20 additional historic landmarks. The initiative seeks to enhance both local and global access to Sri Lanka's cultural heritage through immersive digital experiences. SLT was selected for the project based on its technical capability and experience in digital content development. Let's take a short break now. This is the Nightly Business Report. back to the nightly business report. Sri Lanka's stock market ended mixed today with the ASPI posting gains while the S&P SL20 dipped slightly. Market movements reflected cautious investor sentiment across selected sectors. For further insights on this, we speak with Manusha Kandanarachi from First Capital Holdings.
Thank you, Anuradhi. Reversing the selling sentiment seen yesterday, the Colombo stock market witnessed renewed buying interest today with increased participation from high net worth investors. The index showed a sharp rise during the early hours of trading, driven by bargain hunting as well. However, momentum slowed down thereafter, leading to a period of sideways movement. Despite this, the market closed in positive territory with the index gaining 87 points to end the day at 19,804. Milstar Corporations, People's Insurance, Carson Cumberbatch Cooperative Insurance Company and PGP Glass entered a positive pressure on the index. Additionally, subdued participation from retail investors was also observed. Amidst multiple closings, daily turnover amounted to 3.3 billion rupees, marking a 35% decrease from the monthly average of 7 billion rupees as well. The capital goods sector dominated turnover, contributing 24%, followed by the materials and banking sectors with a combined contribution of 33% as well.
Sri Lanka conducted a government bill auction today to manage its short-term financing needs. The auction results provide insights into investor demand and the country's liquidity position. For further insights, we speak with Akna Tennakon from First Capital Holdings.
Thank you, Anuradhi. Today, the Central Bank of Sri Lanka successfully completed its weekly Treasury bill auction, raising the full targeted amount of 82 billion rupees. The bids received made up more than double the amount of the initial offer, while yields held largely steady. The 3-month bill had an offer of 25 billion rupees and received bids worth 53.3 billion. A total of 28.3 billion was accepted, exceeding the initial offer. The weighted average yield edged slightly lower to 7.61% from 7.62% earlier. The 6-month T-bill offered at 30 billion rupees received substantial demand with bids totaling 75.4 billion. The central bank accepted 33.9 billion, again surpassing the offer. The weighted average yields remained steady at 7.91%. For a 12-month maturity, 27 billion rupees were offered and 38.8 billion in bids were received. The final accepted amount stood at 19.8 billion rupees, while the weighted average yield stayed unchanged at 8.03%. All in all, the auction was fully subscribed, raising the targeted amount of 82 billion, while the yield stayed largely steady. Thank you.
Gold prices were little changed in Asian trade today after 4 days of gains as investors weighed weak U.S. economic data to gauge the Federal Reserve's interest rate outlook. Spot gold ticked down 0.1% to $3,378.13 an ounce. Gold futures for December also lost 0.1% to $3,432.70 an ounce. Platinum futures were unchanged at $1,332.20 an ounce, while silver futures edged up 0.2% to $37,875 per ounce. Benchmark copper futures on the London Metal Exchange were also steady at $9,655.65 a ton, while US copper futures rose 0.4% to $4.40 a pound. US copper prices plunged 20% last week and have since moved largely sideways after President Trump excluded refined metal from his planned 50% import tariff on the metal. Oil prices rose in Asian trade today, recovering mildly from a 5-week low hit in the prior session, as the prospect of tighter U.S. sanctions against the buyers of Russian oil offered some support. Brent oil futures for October rose 0.5% to $68 a barrel, while West Texas Intermediate crude futures rose 0.5% to $64.53 a barrel. U.S. President Donald Trump yesterday kept up his threats of increasing trade tariffs against India over New Delhi's continued purchase of Russian oil. India has rejected Trump's criticism with reports suggesting that New Delhi will continue to buy Russian oil in the near term. China and India stopping their purchase of Russian oil stands to tighten global supplies, with this notion offering oil prices some support. The Sri Lankan rupee has appreciated further against the US dollar today compared to yesterday. According to the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, the buying rate of the US dollar has reduced from 297 rupees and 21 cents to 297 rupees and 10 cents, while the selling rate has also seen a decline. However, the Sri Lankan rupee has depreciated against a basket of foreign currencies, while it has appreciated against Gulf currencies. Let's take a closer look at how the Sri Lankan rupee has performed among other major currencies. Break now. This is the Nightly Business Report. Welcome back. Sri Lanka's Melba has made history by exporting its first large-scale consignment of reinforcement steel to Canada. This milestone marks the country's entry into the global steel export market, positioning Melba in one of the world's most competitive construction industries.
Melba, one of Sri Lanka's leading steel manufacturers, has achieved a historic milestone by exporting 15,000 metric tons of reinforcement steel to the Canadian construction market. This marks the first large-scale steel export from Sri Lanka, positioning the Melba brand in one of the most competitive global construction sectors. Chairman of the Export Developmental Board, Mangala Vijayasinghe, hailed the move as a significant step for the country's export industry and a symbol of long-term growth. Melba's specially engineered 15-meter and 18-meter reinforcement bars were developed to meet Canadian infrastructure standards, reflecting the company's advanced manufacturing and R&D capabilities. The shipment not only boosts Sri Lanka's presence in international markets, but also strengthens foreign exchange earnings and showcases the nation's industrial potential.
CFA Society Sri Lanka, in collaboration with Acuity Knowledge Partners, has launched a virtual equity analyst training program starting on the 22nd of August. The program aims to equip finance professionals and aspiring equity analysts with hands-on training in equity research and valuation aligned with global standards. Covering the full equity valuation process, including industry analysis, financial modeling and valuation techniques, it focuses on practical application through case studies and interactive sessions. CEO Aruna Alvis noted the program supports broader efforts to enhance technical competencies across Sri Lanka's financial sector. Delivered virtually by senior professionals from Acuity, the course targets those in entering equity research, investment banking, asset management and related fields. NDB Bank has partnered with Educo Pathways to enhance access to global education for Sri Lankan students. The collaboration aims to provide tailored financial solutions that support overseas academic aspirations.
NDB Bank has signed a strategic partnership agreement with Educo Pathways to support Sri Lankan students pursuing overseas education. The MOU was signed at the NDB Bank's head office by senior representatives from both organizations. Through the partnership, NDB Bank will offer financial products such as education loans, student file facilities, and foreign remittance services to simplify the study abroad process. Sanjay Pereira of NDB emphasized the bank's commitment to removing financial barriers for students chasing global academic dreams. This collaboration strengthens NDB's role in empowering Sri Lanka's youth through strategic financial support for their educational journey.
SoftLogic Holdings PLC has partnered with India's ATUL Auto to introduce a new range of three-wheelers to the Sri Lankan market. The launch includes 3 models tailored to local needs: the petrol-powered Atul Rik for passengers, the diesel-driven Atul Gem Pax for commercial transport, and the heavy-duty Atul Gem Cargo for cargo and logistics. The collaboration targets growing demand in Sri Lanka for affordable, reliable transport solutions, especially for SMEs and last-mile connectivity. Atul has established after-sales support with technical experts and spare parts readily available in Colombo. SoftLogic CEO Bishri Farooq highlighted the partnership as a strategic move to provide innovative and sustainable transport options in Sri Lanka. Sankan Overseas has made a strategic investment in CL Synergy Group, marking its entry into the freight and logistics sector. This partnership aims to leverage both companies' strengths to expand operations locally and internationally.
Sankan Overseas has entered the freight and logistics sector through a strategic investment in CL Synergy Group, a prominent Sri Lankan logistics company. The investment marks the first time CL Synergy has welcomed a new shareholder since its founding 21 years ago. The partnership aims to strengthen both companies' capabilities in handling complex logistical challenges, especially for Sankan's overseas construction projects. Mevan Gunatillaka, CEO of Sankan Overseas, will join CL Synergy's board to support this collaboration. CL Synergy's co-founder Roshan Silva emphasized the partnership as a shared vision for long-term growth and value creation beyond capital investment.
We're going in for a short commercial break. Global business updates coming on the other side. This is the Nightly Business Report. Welcome back to the Nightly Business Report. Asia's stock markets edged higher today, with Australian shares hitting record high levels, while stocks in Mumbai fell after the Reserve Bank of India kept interest rates unchanged as expected. Japan's Nikkei 225 rose 0.6%, while the broader Topix index jumped 1%. China's Shanghai Composite Index edged up 0.2%, while the Shanghai Shenzhen CSI 300 rose marginally. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index traded largely flat today, and South Korea's Kospi was muted, while Singapore's Straits Times Index gained 0.2%. Australia's S&P ASX 200 rose 0.8% to a record high of 8,848.80 points. India's Nifty 50 index fell 0.4% as some market participants were expecting a 25 basis point reduction amid subdued inflation growth. U.S. stocks ended low as investors weighed the growing impact of tariffs, with companies like Yum Brands flagging trade duties in their earnings reports and outlooks.
Wall Street's main indexes ended lower on Tuesday, with the Dow falling marginally, the S&P 500 shedding 0.5%, and the Nasdaq losing almost 2/3%. President Donald Trump said tariffs on pharmaceutical imports could eventually go as high as 250%, and signaled duties on semiconductors and chips could be announced in the next week or so. Shares of Yum Brands lost more than 5% after the company missed estimates for the second quarter as steep trade duties restricted consumer spending. Among other movers, shares of Snap tumbled roughly 15% in extended trading after the social media company reported its slowest quarterly revenue growth in more than a year, a sign of increased competition from larger rivals, including Meta. And shares of Advanced Micro Devices, down nearly 1.5% at the close, dropped further in extended trading despite forecasting third-quarter revenue above Wall Street estimates. Shares of the AI chipmaker have climbed more than 40% this year, far outpacing a nearly 12% jump in the benchmark chip index.
Walt Disney's ESPN has reached a landmark deal with the National Football League to acquire NFL Network and other media assets from the league in exchange for the NFL taking a 10% equity stake in the sports network.
Disney's ESPN reached a landmark deal with the National Football League to acquire NFL Network, as well as other league media properties on Tuesday. In exchange, the NFL will take a 10% equity in the sports network. Both parties on Tuesday confirmed the deal, which is still subject to regulatory approval. The Athletic, citing sources, reported it could potentially be worth billions of dollars. ESPN declined to comment on the figure, but said the deal would bolster the offerings on its upcoming ESPN streaming service, which will cost $29.99 per month and could launch by the end of August, according to Disney's CEO. It will provide access to ESPN's popular studio shows, as well as its wide portfolio of professional and college sports. Under the new agreement, ESPN would own and operate the TV and streaming rights to the NFL Network, which would continue to carry 7 games a year. Meanwhile, the league will continue to own, operate, and produce NFL Red Zone, a service that allows fans to watch scoring highlights. The league will also retain ownership of certain media properties, such as NFL Films, and platforms such as the NFL Podcast and NFL Plus.
And that wraps up today's Nightly Business Report. We value your opinion as always, so please share your thoughts and feedback with us through email at feedback.8024english@derana.lk or via WhatsApp at 076-805-7933. We'll see you again tomorrow with the latest updates across the business globe. And Virut Balrasurya will join you next with other Derana Sports Central. Until then, I'm Anuradhi Vikramasinghe. Thank you very much for watching. Have a good night.